We're back with another episode of Idea Citizen. Today, we're talking about how stress affects performance with Chloe Maleski. It's always a pleasure to bring somebody on the podcast that I know from a prior life. Previously, I had Bernice on the podcast, which I also met through the Beachbody workout series that we did. You're one of the friends that I plucked from it as well, and I've been following your progress while you've been launching Grow with Chloe. And you have a really interesting background from my perspective. I love how you took your athletic background and pivoted into providing kind of those services for an expertise for other athletes. And I think that there's a parallel between performance from an athlete standpoint, but as well as for the business world. And ultimately, I think you're the perfect person to talk about that. So Chloe, generally, could you give me a quick, or at least the listeners, a kind of a more complete introduction to yourself?
Totally. So you summed up my mission well, but yeah, my background is definitely in athletics. But I grew up in a small town in New England with three brothers, super competitive, played all the sports. I ended up getting a scholarship to Duke University to run. And I had a very underwhelming career there. And I was, in retrospect, definitely going through some mental challenges. I had 3 stress fractures, but I was super physically strong. I wasn't, malnourished, or I didn't have, I had disordered eating, but not in the way where I was malnourished. If anything, it was the opposite. And so it was really interesting that I was getting these injuries. I just kind of muscled my way through the experience. I took a job in business. I studied international relations and Chinese. I thought I wanted to go into the foreign service. Maybe that will happen someday. But and then I pivoted when I got to LA because I always had a side hustle. So I was working in travel and in business. And I always had a side hustle in fitness, and how we met Beachbody and wellness. And so I would be working and then training people at Equinox, F45, all these gyms in LA. And then through personal training and group fitness, I really was just this is such a small sliver of their time. And I feel like it all comes back to mindset and mental performance. And little did I know that mental performance was this flourishing field that is now blowing up. And so I feel really grateful that I got in at the time I did, because it's a really exciting time. So I went back, I got my master's at Pepperdine in psychology. I'm currently, I'll graduate in May as a licensed social worker. And along the way, I got licensed in sports psychology. So my bread and butter is the intersection between wellness and performance, which I think a lot of people confuse, because there's a lot of great performers. You can look at these physique competitors if we're looking at an athletic standpoint, and we're like, wow, but a lot of those things don't serve them in wellness. Right? It's a very narrow section of their life that maybe looks like it's excelling. So my mission in Grow with Chloe is sustainable performance. How do we make these habits and embody these things that can help us perform well consistently and flourish in this path of growth? Because happiness is a fleeting thing, but internal and personal growth is the gift that keeps on giving.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's only, especially if you're say a collegiate athlete, or even somebody continuing into at least some physical athletic component into later life, it's not just about being, or maybe it is for some people, hey, to each their own, but I think for the vast majority of people, it's about the longevity of performance. It's not about the immediacy, unless of course your career, marathon runner and everything. And the point is this is your career, you have a different path there. But from your vantage point, how do you define stress? You define the bad component, or you define the peak component? Do you want to pick one to speak to?
Yeah, totally. Well, I think we hear the word stress constantly. And if we were going to Google, how do I recover from stress, or what do I do to decompress after being really stressed, you're going to see take a walk, drink some tea, take a bubble bath. But in reality, a lot of times this stress is information that it is time to perform. And I wouldn't want someone to go take a bubble bath if they were about to go play in an NFL game, right? That's not going to help them perform in that moment. So I
Okay,
think the first thing,
I like this. I'm sorry to interject, but I'm
yeah,
you know what? This, where you're going, or at least where I think you're going, kind of goes at odds with where I thought this conversation was gonna go. So I'm excited for this. I love not being in an echo chamber. So yeah, please continue.
Yeah, so basically, when we feel these feelings of stress, so maybe that's an increased heart rate, maybe our palms start to sweat, maybe we start to nervous chatter, right? All these physical responses happening, and that's just the obvious ones. There's a lot of internal things happening also. Our airways are opening up so we can get more oxygen and survive if we're about to fight. There's all these physiological things happening. And I think the first step when we encounter stress, is to really pause and say, oh, this is information. This is information that something important is about to happen to me. Something important is happening, or something that I perceive as important is happening. And so I think that's the first step, and that many people skip. They go right into, obviously, we're in fight or flight, but they go right into how do we put this fire out? How do I change this feeling, rather than first encountering and feeling the stress and just saying, oh, this is information.
I like that perspective. That's so interesting.
And then I think, there's positive stress. So some examples of positive stress, and some people call it excitement, right? We hear that all the time. If you're excited, it's the same, the same feelings as stress, just interpreted in a different way. But there's positive stress, like the first time you're meeting with someone, maybe you start on a new team, or you get a new job and it's your first day. Those are examples of positive stress. And I think something we omit or forget to do is, again, interpret it and recognize the energy that we're bringing into those encounters. Something that I've had to really work on, going from more of a coaching and behavior modification to therapy, because I do both. So is a lot of times as a coach, it's like, okay, how do we reframe that into something positive? And I would habitually do that with my therapy clients, and I made the mistake of not first pausing and feeling, okay, what is actually going on here, before we then reframe and change our perspective. So I think that would solve a lot of the world's problems, truthfully, if everyone first paused and tried to identify the emotion of the stress. And even getting more granular than that, like looking at an emotion wheel and really identifying what the stress and what the feeling is associated with the stress. So that is like my home base with every client, because right, if we're trying to communicate with other people, we have to first know ourselves what we're feeling, right? And a lot of times we don't even know what we're feeling, because we haven't been giving the lexicon to even know what we're feeling. So yes, if you haven't seen an emotion wheel, I highly suggest
I'm looking it up as we
playing
talk.
around.
I'm like,
Yeah.
let me ask you this. Do you treat anything that like habitual or like chronic stress or like acute, like do you treat them any differently?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, I think chronic stress, so right, we just talked about positive stress, those first interactions, starting a new job, things like that. And then we have the tolerable stressors. So that would be something like losing a loved one, maybe a career ending injury. Those are things that are really, really challenging, but they're tolerable if, and here's the biggest buffer to stress, if you take one thing away from this conversation, is relationships. Positive, good relationships are the antidote to buffering stress. And so we go from those positive stressors, those tolerable stressors, and then those toxic stressors, which would be ongoing things. So maybe financial struggles in a family that are ongoing, abuse, substance use. And then if you don't have those supportive relationships, that's what then creates the trauma, and it goes on and on and on. But those relationships, those positive relationships, are really the biggest buffer for any form of stress, external at least. We'll go into tools as breathing and those home-based tools that we have heard about.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, positive. I'm making a note of this because I definitely want to bring it back to kind of go into detail around that. Let me ask you this, like, because I feel like you probably work with people that are athletes, of course, but like, are you also working with people that are like just business professionals, or are these people commonly like one of the same? And I guess my follow up question, because you're nodding here, is that my follow up question to that is that like, would you treat these people the same way, or are they treated differently, or like the way that you coach them,
Yeah,
is that different?
totally. I think it's more so to answer your question, yes. And actually, performance coaching is becoming so big in the corporate world. And I'm contracted through companies now where I do a lot of corporate work. So talking to companies about how do we perform well sustainably, integrating mental health and performance so we can do our jobs really, really well. And I think I do treat them. I think business people love being treated like an athlete because we're all an athlete at some point, right? And we still are, right? If you have a body that moves, you're an athlete in some capacity.
Mm.
I think the biggest difference is the body awareness, which can be a blessing and a curse when you're working with athletes. It's just they're hyper aware of everything that's going on in their body, which then can cause them, to overthink more and whatnot. So I think the biggest difference is the physical aspect and how much we would be talking about the physical part. And then with business professionals, yeah, there's less of that just because it's not the profession that they right, that's not their job to
Yeah.
be physically in peak performance all the time. Although there's a way to that you can embody that, and I think it can help you perform well in the corporate world for sure.
So like when we're talking even for athletes, like what kind of performance metrics can stress like actually impact? Like what is actually the thing that we're trying to fix at the end? Is it actually the physical component like running faster or like not having my back hurt? Like what is the goal?
Yeah, totally. So there's actually something which you can also maybe show an image of this or share, but there's a stress performance curve. And if you look that up, you'll probably see it's like a bell curve. And when your stress is really low, so I always use this example. I have a brother who played Division 1 lacrosse, and he is the chillest human you will ever meet. And his coaches would always be like, Mar, where's the urgency? Where's the urgency? Like he always was below the optimal level of stress to perform. Whereas I was on the other side of the spectrum where I'd be like shaking on the starting line, paralyzed. And so there's this middle ground, and it's different for everyone, but knowing of where you're going to perform your best. So, for instance, my brother Marcin, he shouldn't be listening to meditation music and country music before his game. He should probably be listening to some like rock and roll, some hip hop, something to get him amped. Versus me, I really needed probably some country music, some meditation music to get me to that optimal level. So we all have an optimal level, so that awareness of where you're at can really help give you know what tools to use to get you in a place to perform your best in that moment.
I guess the thing I would kind of I guess question with that like rationale is that like does somebody's peak performance really is it really exemplified by like their outward appearance, meaning that like yeah, like I think like different people kind of carry their enthusiasm excitement differently, so like I think it's also important for like a good coach specifically is that like like you're talking about like your brother, he'd be like super chill or whatever, but it's like, and I don't know your brother from anybody, but like so, like your brother specifically, like he outwardly like could be fully composed and chill and everything, not sweating and everything, but inside maybe there's like this fire. So it's like I wonder. I mean, this also comes down to gosh, I forgot what this rationale was, but it's like you can. There's a school of thought, and you probably know it better than, but that's like you can. I think it like it plays off of like 10,000 hours. It's like yeah, you can go running for 10,000 hours and everything, but like if you're just going to be jogging, you're not going to become like an elite athlete. Like, so it's like, where am I going with this? Like, my point really is that, like, I feel like your brother, like, or anybody for that matter, it's like we don't show our peak performance outwardly to other people. Like, I feel like we need like data to like really like understand, like, okay, like, maybe it's like the whole, like, the practice of like journaling and everything, of which I fucking hate journaling. Like I know some people are like journal. I'm like I hate it, but like I
Yeah.
think like drawing those parallels between like how did you perform, how are you feeling, and like what were the end up like the true end up like true results of like whatever like the benchmark was, because it's like I'm looking at like the stress performance curve. It's like somebody in theory could be like I don't know, was it like in this moderate stress level zone, feeling great and have their best, run or whatever it may be. And some people actually need to be in that high stress zone, which probably drives them crazy, but like maybe they're great at it. Um, I don't, I don't know. Like,
Yeah. I hear what you're saying, and I'd like to suggest that they might not even be performing as optimally as they could if they use this information, right? So maybe my brother doesn't even know what his peak performance could be because he didn't tap in to getting himself in a more in his flow state in a zone where he was that perfect balance or his optimal stress level. So I think we're missing an opportunity if we don't play around with this. And in terms of, yeah, it's totally based on performance. So that's a metric we definitely use. And then we also use self-assessment and indicators such as, okay, my palms weren't sweating when I went up to bat. Are you familiar with like the yips? Have you heard of that?
Oh, Chloe, I feel like I'm
So
gonna, okay. If anybody's watching this, I'm gonna start putting this stuff up, and I will definitely include it in the note. Yep. How do you even spell that?
So yips is something that happens most of the time. It's in baseball and golf, and it's the inability to, for baseball, it's throw the ball. So like I've had it with catchers before, where they physically feel like they can't throw the ball back to the pitcher. There's pitchers that go through this, and they just go through what they call like a slump, and they're unable to throw the ball, even
Okay.
though they're professional athletes. Like this happens at the highest of levels, and it's a form of performance anxiety. So markers for that would obviously be we could actually see how they performed and were they able to throw the ball. So a lot of it is self-assessment. There's also assessments that they can physically take, like surveys and whatnot, that we can use to modify or get a gauge of where their stress is at and how that's impacting performance.
Yeah. I think
But I
recently
think
also, I think I read in, was it maybe not super recently, but Simone Biles, like years ago, I think they called it in gymnastics like the twisties, a mental block that occurs when a
yes,
gymnast loses their sense of where they are in the air during a twisting skill. So it's like interesting. So yips, twists, depending on what it is, like there's like different terminology. But so, yeah, so involuntary wrist spasms are yips. Okay.
which is a form of stress, and many people have it. And I'd say that's one of the main things. So a lot of I've had clients with the yips, with the twisties. That's pretty common in the mental performance space.
Let me ask you this, like how I imagine, gosh, like I imagine for like a coach and their athlete, and I'm even thinking like a manager, a boss, and their like, their team, their subordinate and everything. It really comes down to like situational leadership. Like you manage people or you coach people in the way that they need. And to I feel like that must be like I feel like there must be a learning curve also on the side of the coach part of it, because it's not like I've seen in like corporate environments at least a little bit. It's like sometimes there's this like, yeah, continue pushing, or like people want people to like, or even CEOs potentially like want like their management team to manage in a manner that they do. But it's like I mean, I don't know. Maybe that works for some people, but I don't think that works for a lot of people. So can you speak to like how a good coach at least can recognize themselves in this, or like how do you go about coaching coaches?
Yeah, that's actually a lot of where I find the most meaning in my work, because yeah, the coaches are the ones that are creating these environments that often cause the stress. So yeah, I would say bosses and managers and coaches are often a huge part of that toxic stress. And we have to be real and upfront about this, because this is a big challenge. And leadership, learning how to be a leader and create an environment where people feel safe, seen, heard, and valued, which we call a psychologically safe environment. They don't get training on this. This is like, I mean, now that's starting to pop up. That's why, these performance coaching roles exist and whatnot. But it wasn't, it's hard to learn those skills, and then you're thrown in, and all of a sudden you're a CEO of a company, and you're managing people is one of the most challenging things, whether you're a coach or CEO. But I think the number one thing is creating a psychologically safe environment where people feel safe, seen, heard, and valued, which is what you would want in any relationship, period. I think that's a great marker for
Yeah.
any relationship you
I
have.
like that, safe, seen, heard, and valued. Like I think that's a great thing to just like reiterate. I know I obviously don't want to like put it all on like managers or leadership and everything, because I think at the end of the day it's like twofold. Is there a version of that for say like the individual contributor or the athlete? Like what is okay, so if leadership and coaching, like their role in theory is to create a this type of environment, and I'd like to think manage situational leadership or situational management. what is the role of then the individual contributor or the athlete, like the person being coached? Like, what is like, is it just to perform?
Yeah, my from my perspective, it's control their controllables, right? It's all coming back to what do they in that moment? Because again, that's going to increase their confidence and decrease their anxiety when they focus on what they can control. And they can't control their boss and the environment they're creating, but what can they control? They can control if they don't pick up their phone and work on their priority project for the next 2 hours rather than the busy work that they want to do and that's easier, right? And so always coming back to your controllables, I think, is the key for anyone to perform well because again, there's so many things that we don't control.
Right.
So many. And so the more we can come back to that, it's also going to ease our internal state. And I think that's the other thing, all of what we talk about today. So I think the what's most important for the individuals in the corporate world, working for someone that they don't have control over the environment that their boss is creating, is to control their controllables and to implement these practices of stillness, breathing, mindfulness in general. I think those are probably the two best practices. And again, I'm going to say practice, practice, practice. This is not something, it's not a quick fix. It's not a magic pill. It's something that you have to embody every single day or every day that you can. And that is, when it compounds, that's going to help you show up the best version of yourself and be able to perform.
Are there any key things that you find that like stress particularly impacts, like overwhelming, like the overwhelming majority of people? Like these are like some key, like three top things.
Yeah. Three topics that I see people are the most stressed about. Is that what you're
No, not
asking?
not topics, but just like how that stress specifically like presents itself, I guess. Like what is the manifestation of stress commonly for people?
Yeah, I think oftentimes chronic stress leads to depression because a lot of times when we're stressed or anxious, right, we're not in the present moment. We're thinking about the past or the future, which doesn't allow us to live because all we have is the present moment. This moment is truly everything. And if we're not able to be here now, be where our feet are, uh, a lot that I mean it has a ripple effect,
Yeah.
right? We're
All
not
right.
actually we're just going through the motions. We're not showing up in relationships, and that can lead to depression because then you're not really there.
Yeah. And where it pertains to athletes specifically, like injuries, what like control the controllable? What are like, low hanging fruit injuries that like I think are easily avoidable from your perspective?
What are physical injuries that are avoidable?
Yeah.
Hmm. Um, well, I think accepting that if you're a professional athlete, injury is most likely going to happen. I think that's the biggest thing is the acceptance piece is where I live with athletes because I think a lot of times, we're our biggest and we're our worst enemy, right? We're not accepting the fact that we have an injury or that an injury could happen, and that prevents us from moving forward and growing. So I think the acceptance that that's probably going to happen. In terms of injury prevention, again, it comes back to controlling your controllables, doing your PT every day, nourishing your body with foods that are going to help you flourish. Again, those controllables are home base. And from there, then you don't have to worry. Because once you control your controllables, that is like a release.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. Have you like, I mean, this is so interesting. And I guess maybe can we use you as a case study? But like, I wonder, like, I mean, there's one thing around like, we don't need to go back in the past. Like, so it's like, oh, I should have done this differently. But like, let's say like today regarding like your performance, athletically, like, what were you doing previously regarding, say your training and actual running and like whatever that actually looked like and like does that differ today? And of course, granted, like you're at a different stage in life, you're not like doing this on a team, like so there's I assume like there's a bunch of different factors, but like I anticipate that you're whole person kind of has changed during like maybe how you go about this stuff, like maybe like the internal dialogue. Like, can you take me through a few of those things or as much as you're willing to share?
I would say the number one shift, and this is really hard when you're transitioning from, and this is a lot of who I work with, is when you're transitioning from the high school to the collegiate level, to the collegiate level to the professional level. A lot of times the things that worked at those prior levels no longer work at this next stage. And so we have to accept that things need to change. But for me, I would say my mantra is quality over quantity, period. And you were kind of, I think, alluding to that when you were talking about that 10,000 hours, right? If you're just jogging versus not doing the things that are meaningful and being completely present, we can get so much more done. Our mind is so powerful. And so little things like, I think a lot of times when people are injured or they take a rest week, a lot of athletes are perfectionists and it's all about more work is better, like more hours in the gym, the Mamba mentality. I got to be in the gym till 2 a.m. And that has a place for some. And there's such an opportunity for us to be like, oh, I was injured. Instead of me feeling like this is such a big setback, what if I reframe that? I was like, wow, I'm going to be so fresh. My energy is going to be like unparalleled. I am rejuvenated, right? There's ways for us to do that and change the self-talk and that background soundtrack in our mind if we take the time to do so. So I think quality over quantity would be the number one thing that would shift, and not overtraining and finding ways to use my mind to train more than just beating up my body all the time.
So let me ask you this. What does training your mind look like? I'm curious to hear like what, because you spoke to a little bit of like meditation, visualization and everything, but what are you actually like? I love to like, I think there's like the big picture of like strategy, but then there's also like, hey, here's actually like the techniques that I'm actually doing. So I'm curious to understand like what are you like what like how are you optimizing your mind, I guess, to better your athleticness?
Yes, totally. I do want to preface that I'm a therapist myself, and I still believe that physical movement and fitness in general is paramount. And I have a really hard time negotiating our mental health system with how many people that do not take care of their physical body, because they're so connected. I mean, all of the research shows how connected our mind and body are. And I mean, I can't emphasize that enough, that it's when we do physical activity and we get through a hard workout, that is a visceral experience of us being resilient, which then can then translate to our mind and doing hard things emotionally. And that's why I love fitness so much, because it's like this immediate response of like, oh, I can do hard things. I can do hard things.
I like that.
And that can translate so well to the rest of the world if we let it. So I just want to preface that. And I have a segment, I do Mind Gym Mondays, and the whole idea is like, okay, we work out in the gym, how can we work out in our mind? And Mind Gym Mondays include techniques that once we first identify the emotion, let's not breeze over that, right? We talked about how first we have to understand how we're feeling. And then these Mind Gym Mondays are basically ways to reframe narratives, to reframe that soundtrack in our mind. So for instance, one of my favorites that I use with my athletes that are transitioning, and this could be used in the corporate world as well. Say you get a new job at a really competitive company that, it's a big promotion, right? And a lot of times we get in those positions and we get small. We feel, oh my gosh, am I, that narrative of, am I good enough for this, etc. And that's actually what happened to me when I got to Duke. I got there and everyone was fast, everyone was smart, and it was really challenging. The narrative that I wish I had, the Mind Gym Monday that I wish I had, was same tiger, new jungle,
Mm.
right? You haven't changed at all when you get to that new company. You are the same tiger, it's just a new jungle to conquer. And so things like that can really be a foundation and a pillar for us to stay resilient when we're going through transitions and hard times. And so that's what I call, those are Mind Gym Mondays, and I try to do them every Monday. But below that, the foundation is the breathing and the mindfulness, which is a practice, and gratitude, which We hear that all the time, but I would like to add, I think we miss a big part. You hear all the time, like, make a gratitude list. And I did that. I would post every single day my gratitude list. And I would get really, I would get feedback. People would be like, oh, I love that you're writing this. But truthfully, Jackie, I felt like I was going through the motions and like it got really redundant. I'd be like, I'm grateful for my comfy bed, right? And I
I love
didn't
the
feel
honesty.
anything.
I love the honesty. Thank you.
Oh my gosh, I really, really gratitude lists do not do it for me. And what does do it for me is then identifying the emotion that I feel because of the comfy bed. Okay, so I'm grateful for a comfy bed. The comfy bed makes me feel safe. It makes me feel secure. It makes me feel cozy.
Yeah.
Those I can then embody. So a lot of times, like when I talk about gratitude with athletes, or when I talk about gratitude with athletes, it's like, okay, what does a grateful athlete do? How do they show up? Oh, they show up energetic. They show up early. That's how you embody gratitude. So I really encourage everyone to take it a step further when they start a gratitude practice, and not just write the things, but write the feelings and the actions associated with what you're grateful for.
I like that. And I obviously I like the honesty that like just the fact that everything doesn't work for everybody. But like and it's like it's not finding it's not I feel like it's like not cook ultimately it's not cookie cutter. It's not all of these things are going to work for everybody. It's like you just have to find your certain thing that works and go with it. And I like that you were able to kind of pivot something that like wasn't initially working for you and really kind of audit like, all right, what is it like what is this actually like what is the root of this like why did this even come up but like there's something behind it and I think it takes a moment though too it's like let's say 1 week like literally 1 week of doing say like a gratitude practice and everything and then you can figure like it's not like an overcommitment of like oh my god I've committed to like a year of this even like mentally but like let me just feel this out a little bit and it doesn't even have to be public or whatever but it's like let me feel this out for myself and what that looks like. Yeah, I like that resonates with me, I guess is what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, I love that. And you honestly hit a big part of what mental performance is. It's looking over under the car hood before the check engine light goes on, right? I think a lot of times, and that's what mental performance coaching is. It's like, oh, let's look over and see how we can optimize and make things even better so that check engine light doesn't come on versus, oh, now I have to do something. And you're so right. It is not cookie cutter. It's so much about knowing yourself and what works for you, and also having grace with that, and being okay. Like, that's okay that that doesn't work for me or that does. I am really not built for social media. Like, I can't emphasize enough how much that deteriorates my own mental health. And so I have someone on there for me because I know that like my mental health deteriorates as soon as I'm on there. So just knowing yourself is so key in all of this, and then doing something about it. So if you know that something doesn't help you feel great,
Yeah.
changing it.
Yeah. This slightly sidebar, but I'm kind of curious if you're familiar with this. And I think this kind of, for me, exemplifies the need to kind of the practice of being healthy mind and body and everything. Stanford Medicine back in August of 24, they released this study, and I can send it to you and I'll post it in the notes. What their assessment was is that we undergo two periods of rapid change, averaging around age 44 and age 60. And it says that what is it? That like that we have like two dramatic aging bursts where we go through a lot of like molecular changes and everything. So, oh yeah, so like if you've ever felt like everything in your body is breaking down at once, it might be not your imagination. It's like actually, I guess like they've done some studies and figured out that like that your body ages rapidly around age 44 and around age 60. I think it's an interesting study, and I'm not sure if you had a chance to check it out or if you have a take on it, really.
Yeah, I've heard about it. I haven't done a deep dive into the study, but I have heard of this concept. And there's been many studies now on epigenetics and how basically everything that we put in our bodies or do is information of telling our body to grow in a certain way. And I think, if again, sound like a broken record, but controlling our controllables and recognizing that, like, this sip of tea is either going to help my health or deteriorate my health. And it's that simple. Like every decision we make. And that's also my favorite thing is that things can be two things. I
Yeah.
think a lot of times we can also make something way more mental than it is. Like we hear a lot of people aren't drinking these days, it seems, or going alcohol free. And I think we can also we can have, for instance, the other night I didn't sleep well and I didn't drink any wine the night before, but I know that if I drank wine that night, I would have woken up and been like, "Oh, I didn't sleep because of the wine."
Right.
Right? A lot
Yeah.
of times we associate it and we just immediately like, "Oh, the alcohol like did that." And so I would encourage and suggest that people be curious about that of like what assumptions am I making
Mhm.
and recognizing that a glass of like drinking can also benefit our health. There was actually just a study that came out yesterday about how alcohol can actually improve our health because of the social connections it can create, and
Mm.
that's the foundation of human life is human connection. So my point
And
being,
I feel like the big
everything that we
caveat to this is moderation. You know, if even
totally.
was like everything in moderation, even moderation, I guess is like the phrase.
Yes, I love that. I love that. And just not assuming. So that's one of the challenges I have with all these fitness metrics and tech companies about, oh, you wake up and it says you didn't sleep well, but if you didn't look at that, maybe you would have felt like $1 million. But now you're like, oh, it said I didn't sleep well. I guess I didn't sleep well. I really encourage, yeah, to tap in with themselves and control their controllables in terms of consumption of, and that's not just consumption of food, that's consumption of what are you reading, what are you looking
Mm.
at, but who are you surrounding yourself with? That's really the key to performance and wellness.
You grew up in a world, I think, to some degree where like you weren't, I don't think you grew up with like a phone in front of your face. And so my question is what stress mitigation, like stress mitigation kind of um techniques do you think like we're going to like maybe we should be starting today? Like what do we do?
Well, it's wild because you now there's so many tech companies that are actually apps meant to reduce stress from the phone itself.
Ironically, oh, that's funny.
Yes, it's so ironic. Some of them I love and I think have can be really, really helpful. And I've noticed a lot in the mental health world, there's a lot of integration of technology and how do we do that? How do we improve mental health with tech? I think one of the biggest challenges I see is it exacerbates this notion of capitalistic America and the comparison with others. Like, how do we define success? And prior to social media, it was still, we hear the success of like, comparing ourselves with others, the scoreboard, right? When kids get home from a game, it's like, did you win? Is oftentimes the first question. You can't make a mistake. And if we can reframe that into, did we give our effort? Did we learn something? And are we growing? Are we on that growth? Are we learning from these mistakes? Because that's really the key. But the problem with social media is that we don't see oftentimes the mistake. It's the highlight reels. Even if it's not the highlight reels, it's still curated. Oh, I'm going to show this moment when I'm crying. It's not real, and that is a very hard experience to have when you're young and you're still developing and figuring out what authenticity is if you're on an app where nothing is truly authentic.
Yeah. I actually recently spoke with an author for the podcast. His name is Jordan Grummett, and his book is The Purpose Code. And it was kind of interesting because he actually made a correlation to athletes as well. And one of his things was that he was saying it's like if the only goal is to win, then a lot of your life you're missing out on and a lot of things like you're just going to be so unhappy with. But if you find joy at least in the process, it's like yeah, winning is great as well, but it's like if you're not enjoying like the various different components that build into whatever say like the competition is or that race or whatnot, like you're missing out on so much of your life. And he called it there's like big P purpose that's like, oh, when get the first place when, and then little P purpose, and it's about like the process. It's about like the various different components of it. And I believe I probably butchered this quite a bit, but like it
No, you're
resonates here in this conversation for me.
yeah, you're hitting the nail on the head, I think, and that's why I use sports as the the framework for what I do because it's such a meaningful way to learn life lessons,
Right.
because that's what sports is. You don't win every time you lose. And there's a beautiful video of Giannis. It went viral. It was 2 years ago when they lost in the finals. And the person interviewing says, "Do you consider this year a failure?" And he goes on this monologue of like, Michael Jordan played, 16 years in the NBA. He only won 6 championships. Were the other years failures? No, it was steps to success.
That gives me
So we
goosebumps.
have yeah. And so truly recognizing that every failure is actually a step to success, and that changes everything. And if we can have young people and if we can instill that in young people, that is going to create a beautiful world.
Yeah.
And I'm so passionate about that.
Like I love that like we
Yes.
have like these people that like Yana's speaking kind of like speaking a different narrative because I think that at least like my social media thread is there's just so much of the other noise where it's like it's you need to be making way more money or you need to be richer, like this false sense of authority pertaining to money, this false sense of authority pertaining to like even being like a great athlete. Like from my perspective and over the years I've kind of been thinking about this, I'm like, okay, like you like so say somebody that has like a lot of money, it's like, okay, well, like the only true statement we can say is you have a lot of money. If think about the celebrity, like the only true thing you can say about that is like a lot of people know who they are, like if you want to make kind of like these just sweeping assumptions um around a great athlete, like you can what you can say is like they are a great athlete, but that doesn't speak to ultimately like how is like their family life, how is their mental health, how is how is like I don't know like their internal health, do they have like a good like heart, like whether it be physically or emotionally, like there's all these different things that it's like I don't know, I think we get a little bit blinded, and I think that the constant messaging structure of social media and like that continual scroll, it's like strong, it's very reinforcing of like the whatever the narrative currently like that that PR agents are kind of trying to get out there, but whatever.
No, I agree with what you're saying. And I think many times when we compare ourselves to other people or we feel envious or jealous, oftentimes it's only of a certain sliver of their life. And we don't recognize that. We think, oh, I'm jealous of this person or this, I wish I had their life. But we're only seeing one aspect. Maybe it's the money, maybe it's the relationship, right? And we don't
The
see
Instagram
the
curated version of thing.
yes, the full bodied experience of, oh no, they were in a really dark place for the past 3 months or whatever it might be. You just don't know. And so that can be a something where we go exercise we do in therapy, which you may have heard of, is check the facts.
Yeah.
Whenever these narratives happen, you pause and you check what are the facts that just happened. For instance, if maybe our boss didn't email us back, what are the facts? Well, I delivered my last assignment to him or whatever it might be, instead of letting our mind go, I have this wild narrative. The last time I spoke to him was less than 24 hours ago, da da da, whatever it might be. So pausing and checking the facts can be a good tool to get us out of our head.
Yeah. You talked at the at the top of the conversation around like positive relationships. So I would like to kind of go into that a little bit, like in terms of support systems for performance.
Yeah, so positive relationships, we could talk about this forever. I like to start with the 5-to-1 ratio, which is from Dr. John Gottman, which all of his work is around usually couples, relationships, and he could sit down with a couple and within 10 minutes he could determine whether they would stay together or not. And he found that the couples that stayed together, their ratio of positive to negative things they said to each other was 5 positives for every one negative thing that they said. And so this is a really nice framework to use with ourselves and how we interact with people around us. The human experience, the person is not even in a place to receive negative feedback until those positive interactions have happened. And don't get it twisted, that doesn't mean you have to go in and I see you, Jackie, and I give you 5 compliments off the bat. Simply me walking into the room with you, having a smile on my face, giving you
Yeah.
a hug, that's already two positive. Saying your name, that's three. But just keeping it, like having a check of how you're showing up for other people and yourself. I know you said you don't like to journal, but I think it really hit home. You know, if I have a bad day, I can write pages and pages. And if I have a good day, I probably don't pick up my journal. You know, the human experience tends to focus on the negative, so we have to proactively focus on those positive experiences. And that's also going to help relationships flourish if we aim for that 5-to-1
Yeah.
ratio.
Have you found any value to to people building a routine through their life and kind of like sticking to the schedule and just like to provide some ease? Like, does that make a difference one way or another?
I know it's not helpful. I do think it varies, right? It's not cookie cutter. So some people thrive off of routine and some people can feel like it gets really stale. So I think setting aside times to check in because again, right? I think the gratitude list maybe worked for me at one point, maybe, and then I had to check under the hood and be like, okay, this isn't working anymore. What
Right.
can I shift? The most important part when we're creating habits and routine is again the environment and setting ourselves up for success, right? So if you don't want to be scrolling on your phone before bed, don't have your phone in the room or have it walking distance away. So setting up our environment to make us be successful is a controllable and something that can really amplify us in terms of instilling new habits that are going to better our lives.
Yeah, absolutely. So, if you are a wealth of knowledge, where can people find you? You mentioned that you're not super active on social, but I would encourage you to get more active because I think you've got so much good, so many good tidbits to share.
Thank you. Well, I found a controllables. I'm gonna hire someone to do social, so I'll be there, but I won't physically be on there. But Grow with Chloe is my social handles. I am doing a goal setting workshop, free goal setting workshop this month. So if
Great.
anyone is it's 2025 and going into that, and I think it will surprise you. It's not going to be the standard things that we may think of when we're setting new intentions and goals for 2025. So I'll send you information for that, but that will be a free
Yeah.
workshop that I'm going to host.
I'm going to say that I want to sign up for that right now. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring. Join the Idea Citizen LinkedIn group and share this episode with a friend.